Hi, everyone. So the other day we were left with this terrible internet found definition of jazz. It doesn't really, cover all the stuff that we want to cover when we talk about what jazz actually is. It's got some stuff in there, right? But this is why I had you do this particular media quiz. So I am looking forward to reading some of your definitions of jazz, what you gleaned from some of the experts who talked about it. But let me just tell you kind of about what I think. So first of all, jazz is definitely a uniquely American music. Now this music could not have been invented anywhere else. It's a product of our very, very unique sort of melting pot, and just the way that this country came about. It's sort of the epitome of what folk music can be. It began as something that people were playing because it felt good, but after a while, it really became something that was studied, and it has sort of attained this lofty status. And I mean, look, here I have a job at a university because of this, and we study this music in a very academic way. But we try not to lose that heart of the music. But there's a bunch of stuff in here that we can talk about in sort of academic terms. For the music actually to be considered jazz, it really needs to draw upon the vocabulary of its creators. In other words, if I'm listening to some music, if it doesn't have that foot in the past, if it doesn't have some of the vocabulary, the musical vocabulary that's been created in the last 100 years, it's not going to really sound like jazz to me. Some people might argue that point when they're listening to a particular type of music, but you can usually hear it if you listen to jazz, and you're going to listen to jazz for a couple of months here during this class. So I think by the end you're going to have a better idea of what is jazz and what is not. There's a lot of great jazz being played today and created today. I feel like the best jazz of today has that foot in the past. So you can recognize it as jazz, as being played by people who have developed that jazz vocabulary, but then they will bring in their one foot moving forward part of it, where they're sort of trying to reimagine or bring their own personality or other genres of music into the mix to move it forward. And I think that really that's what makes it really good contemporary music. So next thing we're going to talk about is improvisation. Most jazz, I have to say, has some sort of improvisation in it. And, I think a lot of people, when they talk about jazz, they talk about this idea that, improvisation is a core element of it. And I would agree with that to a certain extent. However, as jazz sort of, evolved, I can think of some pieces, maybe some Duke Ellington pieces, for instance, that don't have a lot of improvisation in them. They're sort of, set pieces that still have that jazz feel. Maybe there's some improvisation in there, from the rhythm section, but, doesn't necessarily have to have improvisation. But the feel and the style and the vocabulary, that sort of foot in the past, is really, what's going to put it in that jazz category. However, improvisation, super, super important stuff. And I'd like to do a little demo for you right now. I'm going to play my trombone, and we'll talk about it after you check it out. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Just a couple notes. So first of all, I was doing that obviously here in my office with a pre-recorded track. Jazz is much, much better appreciated in person with more people playing it. I mean, I usually in this class, when we're not under quarantine, would like to, do that demo with a bunch of students and do it live and with you all in the room, and you can feel the energy. And, that will affect the performance too, which is something I'm going to talk about here in a second. But, hopefully the demo gave you a little insight into what's going on, but it's definitely better live. Definitely better live. There used to be a textbook that I used for this class, which I don't anymore, but it had a couple of good thoughts in it about improvisation. I think improvisation, a good way to think about it, it's really on-the-spot composition. I mean, the jazz musician is really composing lines right on the spot. The caveat, though, is that, it's not necessarily all brand new stuff, right? Like I said in the video there, in the little demo on my thought bubbles. Generally, what the improviser plays is based on this sort of lifetime of accumulated vocabulary that they've developed as a musician. There are those times where we are creating brand new things right on the spot, but for the most part, there is that vocabulary that we sort of rely on. Improvisation, though, became really, really important, especially when we get to like people like Louis Armstrong. That became this criterion which the jazz musician gets judged. Whoever can play the best improvised solo, or the cleverest, or the coolest, or just the most interesting improvised solo, they're the ones who get the respect, right? And I guess this next point kind of talks about what I was talking about, that idea of vocabulary, but also, the skills. We try to be the best musicians that we possibly can as jazz musicians, and so we're not just developing that vocabulary, but we're developing these skills that allow us to bring the music that's in our head out into the air. So, and once again, this demo that I did was with a pre-recorded track, and I tried to point out some areas in there where, I left a little bit of space. And, if I were playing with real people, they would tend to maybe fill in that space or react to things that I would play. If I got louder, maybe the rhythm section would get louder. Maybe some other horns would come in and improvise like a little background or something. So we're really, in my demo, sort of missing a lot of those things. Now, we are going to watch some videos where we're going to see people and hear people doing that. But, as an improvisation goes along, the improviser is going to listen to the rhythm section, so they will interact with each other. That's going to affect the improvisation. The venue, the audience, the acoustics, all kinds of things. There's a very famous story where, Charlie Parker was playing a blues, and then all of a sudden on the recording, which was a live recording, he started quoting, and this is something that jazz players will do. They'll actually take another melody and work it into their improvisation. So they took, he started playing Anchors Away in the middle of this improvisation. Well, it turns out, if you just hear that on the recording, you weren't in the room, but what happened is a sailor walked into the room at that particular point. So that was something that affected his improvisation right there on the spot. And he was so clever that, he worked it into his improvisation. We'll talk about Charlie Parker. He was a genius. Number of levels simultaneously, right? So, for instance, when I was playing there, sometimes I was thinking about what I was playing. Sometimes I wasn't. Maybe I was kind of thinking about what the next place I was going to go. There's this sort of technical thing, maybe because I'm, sort of in this academic space, there's theoretical things that I think about, intellectual things, base some of the playing on intuition. When you really get into this music, maybe there's spiritual things that that will guide you. Maybe there's emotional things that will guide your solo. There's all kinds of different levels that are going on, and sometimes simultaneously. And it's full of risk, right? You might, as an improviser, you might go for something that you hear, and maybe it won't work out. And you know what? The demo that I just played for you guys, that had, some warts in it, and I just left them in there because, maybe I tried to go for something, I didn't quite make it. But that happens, and, that's part of it. We're going to hear some of the greats actually do that. What will make a great player is that they'll take those little warts and they'll make them musical. So anyway, but, so this is what this Discover Jazz textbook points were. But I sort of have a definition of jazz improvisation that I like to share with you. I feel like it's a random and reactive performance of learned vocabulary, usually within a harmonic or formal framework. So in other words, like for instance in my demo, this was a tune, right, called Blue Monk by Thelonious Monk, that was based on a 12-bar blues progression, which we're going to talk about next week. And so this is a framework where I was improvising within, right? So it's, it's not unlike, if you have a piece of art and you put it in a frame, you now know that art is inside of that frame. However, we're sort of improvising within this sort of harmonic and formal framework. We are going to talk about a genre of jazz later on that's called free jazz, where some of that framework gets pushed to the side, but not always all of it. So, usually we're drawing on this learned vocabulary, right, and kind of fitting it into this framework. I think a good solo, the best improvised solos, right, are going to have great time feel and sound. In other words, the time feel is going to really make us want to move. It's going to fit within what the rhythm section's doing. It's going to feel good. The sound of that particular performer is just going to take us in. It's going to take us on a journey, right? Compositional elements. In other words, as we're improvising, maybe there are some things that we can do to make our solo kind of more cohesive and make it kind of hang together a little bit. A good improviser will remember what they played, maybe refer back to something they played earlier, or maybe they'll take something that they've played and maybe extend it or smush it together. There's all kinds of ways that we can sort of create cohesiveness in an improvised solo, and I think the more you can do that, the better that solo is. I also like to think that a good solo will have this really, really great balance of expectancy and surprise. If the solo is, you kind of know what that soloist is going to play because maybe they set it up that way, or and they kind of keep doing the same thing, and there's not a lot of surprise in it. It tends to get boring, right? But if you can have a little bit of that expectancy, where you're listening to it and the soloist is going along, and you kind of know where they're going. Oh, I see it, and then they go in some unexpected direction. That creates that sort of excitement in there. So I think that is one thing we're going to really look for over the semester. The great soloists will do these type of things. All right, so next week we're going to get a little bit more into some of these musical terms. Once again, I know you're not all music majors in this class. Don't sweat it if some of the terms that I've been using are going a little bit over your head right now. Hopefully we will clear those up a little bit next week, and then as we move along with the class. All right, we'll see you in the next video.